We want to let you know that we have a presentation from our command staff of the police force led by Chief McMurray that will last about an hour and a half. Then, depending on council questions, we will move along from there. We have received from three groups, from the NAACP, Citizens Coalition for Criminal Justice, and 8 Can't Wait campaign. We have received about 28 different recommendations of policy, procedure recommendations, and we have looked at those. We will have those out. They will be published and sent via the internet and email to people on Friday. We will be releasing those, and those will be our answers to the 28 different suggestions we've had about policies and what we should do policy-wise. So that will be done on Friday. Tonight we will be talking about where we are as a police force and where we want to move in the future. So, Mr. President, if it's okay with you, I'd like to turn it over to our Finance Director, Penny Smith, to start with our financial report.
Absolutely. And I just want to make sure the information that you're about to present, will that be presented online publicly?
Yes,
The slides
the
okay.
slide bank will be put on the website, and I'm not sure how soon, but
Yes, ma'am.
and it will be released by communications.
Thank you.
Okay. So, let's see if I can get set up here. So Penny Smith, Director of Finance for the City of Huntsville. I just want to thank you for allowing me to speak tonight to the finances and to our financial status. So tonight we're going to go into a few things which on its nature you may say, why are we doing this? But we're going to go through this because it will make a difference in the end when I start talking about those numbers and where we're going. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour through the financial structure and the budgets of local government, kind of a 101 for fund accounting. And I'm going to touch on the economics and the drivers, and the drivers in this COVID economy. I'm going to dive into some specific revenues and expenditures and then bring it all back together. Through this presentation, I will pepper my comments with remember this for later, or remember earlier in the presentation I said such and such. So this will be important as we move through the city finances presented here. The interplay and the movement of all these different pieces come together to make our clock tick and be on time and mark the time of the day. We are stewards of a large and growing city. We need to ensure that our financial models reflect the expectations of the growth and the needs of our current residents. The budget both projects the economic development for the exciting future ahead of Huntsville and the current responsibility to provide and stabilize our hurting economy in this time of pandemic. So this slide's really busy. I will break this down. And I want to take a look at the city of Huntsville. I want to invite you into my world, the work of governmental fund accounting. We are not a business. We do not have profit motivation. We do not increase the bottom line. We are not the federal government. We cannot make money, nor do we borrow without cost. In other words, we don't deficit spend. We are not the budget of another, we are not the department of another entity. In other words, we don't get handed a budget each year and say, go spend wisely, and next year there'll be another budget. So all of that needs to fit in and come together. As a local government, which includes cities, towns, counties, and the like, we assess and collect taxes and charge fees with which we provide services for the citizens of the city. We are always tied legally to the state in Alabama, and as our authority is granted from the state of Alabama. Laws, both local, made at the state level, and the federal level govern how much the city can collect, but also how we spend those resources. We work in the construct of funds, which is what is presented on the slide here. Each fund is comprised of revenues and expenditures, cash, asset balances, accounts payable and liabilities, and fund balances, which I loosely term revenues or equity. These funds help us track, manage, account for, and report on the varying sources of revenues and expenditures, ensuring that they are regulated in accordance with law. Overall, we're going to look at the general fund. We're going to look at special revenue funds, and there are a lot of them. We're going to look at capital projects funds, debt service fund, enterprise fund, and fiduciary funds. I don't say on the next few slides I'm going to walk you through all of these funds, but I will not touch on every single fund that we have in the city. And I say all this not to bore you, but to give you a sense of the interplay in the cities and our budgets as they come together, in particular for this year. So the general fund. It is usually the largest fund of any city, and it is in our case too. Much of the revenues and expenditures are controlled at the local level. For the city, the general fund is much of where our revenues and most of our departments are accounted for. So this is a list of the revenue sources that are accounted in the general fund and a list of the departments. It's not intended to be read, and I'm not going to go into that. But this just shows you how large it is and how complex the general fund in and of itself is as nature. Besides the general fund, kind of housed underneath that is our health and life insurance fund and our events donations fund. The city is self-insured and therefore budgets and maintains the health insurance of all our employees. Special revenue funds. Special revenue funds are used to account for specific revenue sources that are restricted or committed to spending for a specified purpose. So we have ad valorem or property taxes that are levied under certain laws. In this case, they are restricted for the furtherance of education. So the school board asked the city, in this case, asked the city to acquire debt for a capital expenditure, usually school buildings and the like. These funds can be used to pay that debt service for the schools, and that's exactly what happens in this fund. The city has also determined that it is in its best interest to provide a certain portion of sales taxes for the operation of the Huntsville City Schools. This is where we account for that apportionment. Lodging tax funds. There are 3 or 4 lodging tax funds. They account for the lodging taxes that are collected in the city, and by local law, by the law set by the will of the council, they are allocated for certain spending on tourism, sporting, and entertainment venues. Tax increment financing districts. This has been used to our advantage in the city, 6 of which are in current operation. They allow for a designated area's ad valorem taxes to fund infrastructure for economic expansion and opportunities in the future. Gas tax funds are designated for road and bridge repair and maintenance. Certain federal and state funds can only be spent on public safety, corrections, and court expenditures. Cemetery funds can be apportioned for spending on maintenance and care of our cemeteries. Although this is not an exhaustive list, this gives you a picture of all the special revenue funds in the city. The city has designated a certain portion of funding to be invested in our capital projects of the city. Road construction, recreation facilities, and the like are accounted for in these funds. Also, whenever we borrow for large capital projects, they are acquired into a capital projects fund and accounted for there. Those last 3, I'm going to go through real quickly, is the debt service fund. It helps us manage and ensure correct and timely payment for the outstanding debts of the city. In this fund, with school, sewer, and all the city debt that we manage, over $890 million in outstanding debt for the city. The enterprise fund, which, not counting our component units, only is comprised of our water pollution control facilities. These types of funds are accounted for particularly separate from the rest of it because they look and act like a business. So in our sewer fund, we charge residents, obviously, for sewer charges for items on their bill. And then we utilize those particular revenue streams, which can be accumulated over time, for all the assets, to manage all the assets and the distribution, intake, we don't distribute, and the intake for our sewer collection system. Fiduciary funds, we only have one. It is the Retiree Trust Fund for Health Benefits. These assets are not our own, and we hold these in a custodial relationship for others. So coming back, bringing this all together, I say this to emphasize the interplay of funds so that you will understand some of what I talk about later. So to give you an example, a downturn in gasoline taxes may need to be offset by the general fund or spending on road repair and maintenance. So one of the ways to look at funds is also to kind of compare them to buckets. So some buckets, i.e. the property tax funds that we collect for the schools, are closed. No matter how full that bucket is, we cannot access those funds for use in other parts of the city. So some buckets are closed to us. Other buckets are pretty wide open. The general fund is a wide open bucket. We may utilize savings in the general fund to offset something that happens in another fund. Maybe a capital project that needs to be backfilled, something that's important to the city. So that's why we're talking about those funds tonight. So I know you'll be happy to hear that we're going to move on from Governmental Accounting 101, and we're going to talk a little bit more about local government budgeting. So under our Class 3 city, the mayor will present an annual budget to the council. Budgets must be adopted by the beginning of the fiscal year, October 1 in our case, and this provides appropriations for the following year. Albeit on a different scale, I would like to compare the city of Huntsville's budget to your own. So I'm going to go through this list that's up here, and we're going to kind of compare it back and forth. So for revenues, so you look at your salaries. You may be a 1 or a 2 income household. Perhaps you have investment interest, or maybe you're even lucky enough to have a doting uncle that brings funds into you each year. For the city, that is looking at and projecting our sales and use taxes, lodging taxes, all the different fees and appropriations that come back into the city each year. So operating expenses and expenditures, they are the backbone. So for you, that might be your utilities or food, basic needs to keep the services going. For the city, that's going to be salaries and benefits, utilities, and repair and maintenance on all of our different equipment and buildings that we own. So then we got to look at debt. You probably have a mortgage, or maybe you have an automobile loan. The city acquires debt to pay for large capital projects in the same way. So that big debt number that I threw out there a few minutes ago, all that debt service needs to be managed so that we can pay, and that is put into our budget. Outside agencies. So what agencies do you give to that enrich your lives? Maybe that's a church organization, maybe that's the Mission Downtown, or perhaps you like the animal shelter. So we all give to our different organizations. That is the same thing happens with the city. So we look out and look at what enriches our community's lives, and at the will of the council and the mayor, we go out and give money to those organizations. Capital projects. Cash or debt, how am I going to fund this? What can I afford? So my husband and I, since we recently moved to town, we just acquired a 1960 split level ranch. It needs a lot of work. And so there's a lot to do to be able to do that all in one year. We can't afford it all. And so we've got to decide what's the priority, keeping the roof on, or do I redo the living room? So just like that, the city has to decide what projects take priority and what are we going to put on there. I know right now as we speak, Shane and John are both working on those capital projects funds for which they are kind of the head of. And so they're going to look at that, and they're going to see what we can set in future years and what are we already working on. Fund balances or reserves, and I put that in smaller letters. All of this is layered with how much we need in reserves. Just like your home budget, you need to be able to have a certain amount in the bank that you are going to apportion out for the next months for rent and otherwise. You also need to have things for savings. Maybe you're saving up for that expense next year, or maybe it's for bad times. I always want to have money in the bank in case there's some kind of downturn in my life. So the city does the same things. You know, what do we need to maintain cash flows? What do we need for financial stability in the bank? The city has wisely put away 11.5% of our budget to make sure that we have enough for that financial stability. Cash and liquidity. we want to be nimble. This helps us to be nimble. This has really helped us in this downturn to backfill some of the things and the needs that we have. So having cash in the bank and having a liquid investment pool is also very important to the city. So the economy. So I'm not going to dwell on numbers. This is not why I'm not going to go into these charts and graphs. I simply put this up here to remind us of why we're here today. As we see positives test and hospital numbers rise or level out, we have seen the Huntsville economy react in a variety of ways, most of them not pleasant. In the next few slides, I hope to take you through a look at the city finances and the forces that affect those financial positions of the city of Huntsville. So unemployment. Unemployment paints a grim picture. The graph, moving from left to right, we have the green in March of this year, which was at 2.6%. April saw us shoot up with unemployment to 11.8% and then fall back to June of 7.5%. To our city, this is a two-fisted punch. It means less money in the household turning over in the economy. But it also means that businesses are not purchasing goods and services in the economy. So it affects us in both ways. Basic needs move to the forefront of spending. This is noted in sales tax, which I'll bring up in a little bit later slide. And believe it or not, savings actually go up. People are scared. They want to keep things close to their vest. So you may say, well, that's not a bad thing, but for our economy and city finances, it's not good. Again, the turnover or the churn in the economy is what brings revenue back into the city. The numbers are moving in the right direction. Huntsville is at 7.5 for now, but most economists say that from here we will see very slow gains well into the next year. I should have said it at the beginning, but I will say it now. It all depends. We are trying to make movements as we watch things happen. If we go home again, I will be up here with other people trying to figure out where do we cut, what's going to happen to our economy next. If we find a cure, I will probably be up here again, but albeit I will have a smile and we will be doing budgets very differently. So, housing and permits. This is actually a good story. House sales were strong despite the COVID economy. Housing starts were up, and the overall economy in this area looks to be strengthening nationally as well. This bodes well for our community and for ad valorem taxes, which I'll mention later. And permits are the same. In 2020, there have been an average of 252 permits issued each month, which is an average of 50 permits more than what was happening in 2019. While skeptics may say this represents projects already in the pipeline, economists tend to point to this as a positive in our economy, and in home construction and sales are predicted to remain stable and point towards growth. I say all that to say that Huntsville is strong. We have cornerstone employers and they are stable. And although we have seen unemployment rise, we are situated better than most. Many now work from home, and we have retained much of the income through our large employers. Included in that is Redstone Arsenal, FBI, and Toyota. Continued population growth is a part of this. People continue to move to our community, providing not only energy and spending, but resilience. We will adapt to the new norms and poised to take the next necessary steps. However, we are not without challenges. Part of our city's makeup and the excitement of Huntsville is the close thread that we have with others around the nation. The restrictions on the Department of Defense travels have stifled some revenue streams. We need to keep close tabs on this and at the decisions at the federal level concerning this travel restriction. Separation and continued vigilance in containing the spread of the virus has restricted our revenues concerning entertainment venues, bars, and restaurants. I have met even today with a number of our large entertainment venues. This will require some tough decisions on our part and thoughtful calculations on the city's part. And yet I am hopeful, not just for a cure, but I have seen, y'all, I wish you could be in some of these meetings. some of the tenacity and the courage and the inventiveness of these owners and directors and employees that come out of these organizations. I am truly just been impressed, and my heart is glad for it. So we're going to look at revenues. In particular, I'm going to go into the sales and use tax revenue and lodging tax, which I've been talking to a number of times as I've gotten up here over the months. Sales and use taxes make up right at half of our city's revenue streams. Its increase or decrease can move the needle of city finances, so let's look a little deeper. I want to look at the thread across the year. So in the graph in front of you, you will see trend lines from 2017 through 2020. Sales and use taxes collected relatively evenly throughout the year, with the exception of the Christmas spending season, which is then collected in January, and you see that blip. So I want you to bear in mind this kind of trend line for later, because I will come back to it. The chart below just shows how the funds are split up and allocated. Most of you know that, but I thought I would put it up here for reference. So I've brought this up earlier in the year, about how COVID has affected the makeup of business tax remittances. So this is a pie of sales tax by business type. Our grocery and wholesale clubs, including Sam's and Costco in this type, increased in sales. They spiked in April and has leveled out since then. However, they are still remain strong. Restaurants have taken the biggest hit. Although a smaller slice of the city pie, it really underpins all of our smaller remitters. We have many restaurants in the city. The concern remains as to how and if they were able to weather the storm. Retail overall took a hit early when closed, but the Lowe's and the Home Depot, those do-it-yourself projects that people like to do when they're at home, has really led this category and has brought it back. We've even seen a slight increase in this slice of pie during June and July as stores have opened back up and gotten back to business. Auto dealerships took a turn right when we first went down, but they have come back up a bit. Albeit they are still lower than sales last year, they are starting to see a recovery from this. So this is a chart, and you'll see a few of these as I go through the remainder of the slides. So in the blue columns is last year, FY19, actuals, collections as we move through the year. And the orange columns is FY20, and you'll see that this graph has been produced through June 30th. All of those sales reflect the prior month because we are doing sales and use tax. This chart only shows 1% of sales and use tax. As it's allocated out over a number of different places, that was easier for us to see. The red line that you see is the 2020 budget overlay. So that trend line that I told you to remember earlier, this line is based on that trend line. So you can see that, that earlier on in the year, in October and January, February, we performed well above last year and performed above our budget. So that has really helped us because as you move along the graph in May and June, you see that we are way down from prior year's taxes, and we are way off of the budget. To date, sales and use tax is up, actually, by 2.8%. However, since we are about 75% of our budget, we are only at 74.5% of our budget. So we're 0.5% below our budget, what we expected to receive, which was what our larger budget was predicated on, by approximately $1 million in lost revenue. This is the same chart. The only thing that I've added is these gray lines out to the right, which are projected amounts. As you can see, we expect to be down. We expect to end the year with less than 0.5% below last year, but with all that factored in, we'll be around 3.5% below budget, which equates to approximately $7 million in lost sales and use taxes. So lodging taxes, and this will look very similar. So the trend line above, you will see we actually collect a lot more in the summer months, April through July, August, and September, than we do earlier on in the year. We do have the yellow line, I guess it's yellow. The yellow line is the 2020 effect. That spike up in February is an anomaly. We had a collection for an audit that was performed, and so we had a lot of revenue come in. That has actually helped benefit us a lot in this COVID economy. Then you see that we've taken a sharp downturn. So this is the same chart as I showed for sales and use tax, except for lodging tax. It is 1% of that lodging tax. So at the first of the year, you can see we were outperforming. Last year, we were outperforming budget levels. In February, we had that audit, that one-time hit of that collection from an audit. And then April, May, and June looks pretty dismal. To date, lodging taxes are down 14% from last year at the same time. We should be at around 74% of our budget. We are only at 71%, with approximately $1.5 million in lost revenue to date. We expect to end the year at around 25% below last year's. This means below last year's actuals, which means we will be around a 35% loss under budget, which equates to approximately $4 million in lost revenue for lodging taxes. So I'd like to talk for just a minute to our other revenue sources, because this takes an effect on how the overall funds are doing. So gasoline taxes taken in various forms, usually cents on the gallon, with the latest, and includes the latest state act last year, which was passed. Remember, the remittances from the state lags by 2 months. So up until May of this year, or March sales, gas tax revenue was up by 0.5% over last year. But for the last 3 months, we have averaged a 25% fall in gas tax revenue. So we are at 70% of the budget. We expect to fall by year end around 7 to 10% below budget. We will watch this very closely, because this revenue not only plays into our funds, but it also plays majorly into the state funds. So if we're experiencing this kind of loss in revenue, the state is also experiencing that. SSUT, or Simplified Seller's Use Tax, is our online sales that runs through the state and comes back to us. Although a relatively small amount, it is double from the budget levels and growing. We expect this to continue throughout year end and into next. Obviously, this has been affected by us being at home and all those Amazon trucks, UPS trucks, and FedEx trucks that come by our houses. Pilot revenue. Through an agreement with Huntsville Utilities, a mutually beneficial relationship that we have with them, this is due to the expansion of both services and the city population. This revenue stream continues to grow year in year. But included in this figure is an additional one-time payment due to an audit that was undertaken by Huntsville Utilities. And so we have been able to be above budget in this. We will look at this closely, take that audit number out in order to budget for the next year's revenue in this stream. Sanitation charges, or garbage. We expect this to be on budget. It remains steady. However, I want to mention the increased cost in overtime and tipping fees affect the other side of the ledger due to all of that increased, that the home, when we live at home and we produce more garbage, we have seen increase. It's additional yard waste and the volume that we produce. It's another kind of COVID effect that we see. Property taxes, or ad valorem taxes, the majority is collected early on in the fiscal year, and we expect this year to be on budget. It is interesting as we consider this because we're still growing. We have home sales that have remained strong in the Huntsville markets. My only cautionary tale about this is that given the ability during COVID to delay or even forego mortgage payments in some cases, This may affect escrow amounts and the ability to pay property taxes in the future. So we'll be working with our partners at the county, tax collectors and assessors, to be sure that we are on target and that we properly budget for this revenue stream in the coming year. Permits. This was a happy note. They too have remained strong, and we see the revenue streams actually topping budgets by year end. Licenses are tricky. They are a lagging indicator to our economy, and while this year is expected to end on or near budget, the majority was collected in January and February. Next year will need to be appropriately reduced based on the losses in gross receipts for this year. So now the other side, expenditures. From the first week of the announcement back in March, the mayor quickly asked the departments to cut and put in place plans for reductions in spending. They responded to this, and this is really truly what turns the corner for the city in this fiscal year. As you see, the departments are under budget. When we are at 75% of the year, which is shown in gray in this chart, the departments are only at 66% of their budget. They have really saved and really cut their spending. In looking at this, this will continue through the remainder of the year. However, there's a few things that we look for. We tend to rise that trend line that I put up there for both sales tax and lodging taxes. Same thing flows for our expenditures in the general fund. So we spend a little more in the summer than we do the rest of the year. Parks and Recs opened up, we have more landscaping, there's more grass to cut, things like that. So the city spends more. So we will look to that trend and expect this number to decrease some as we move throughout the remainder of the year. Savings from community development and public transit, which I will talk to a little bit later, also affect these numbers. So the federal stimulus grants. So Congress is working on the fourth federal stimulus package as we speak. What this means for us, this isn't the money machine in the basement, as everybody thinks that I have. It's not there, but this does help. All of these funds coming together. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, y'all well know of crisis, whether we have a hurricane, and in this case, the pandemic. We can, at 75% of our actual cost, this will help us with all the direct cost of masking, PPE, testing site setup, and the like. So we have already applied for our first reimbursement under this, and there will be more to come. Congress's latest coronavirus relief package, or the CARES Act, which actually stands for the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. It is the largest economic relief act in U.S. history. It's trillions of dollars. Our state received $1.8 billion in the last round. We can apply for reimbursement of direct costs associated with the city's COVID response. That term, direct cost, has been refined and changed. I don't know how many times, how many memos and stuff I have read through the course of this. I want to give a shout out to EMA here, because finance has worked directly with EMA in order to try and understand and be appropriate in our reimbursement efforts. We have already sent in our first reimbursement, and this was specifically for technology. This will not, however, replace lost revenue. And however, we will be working with others to replace as much as we can, to replace cost as much as we can. The business relief in the form of PPP and the CARES Act, quarantining for child care, quarantining or allowing child care to flow through. A lot of businesses got reimbursed for those types of things. The governments did not. So we came out of our own pockets for that money. So that is the CARES Act, and there's probably a ... on that, more to come as we see the fourth stimulus package roll around, and we look to some others to help us navigate that. The FTA, or the Federal Transit Administration, forms in the U.S. Department of Transportation. As we run our bus services, things like that. We actually have grants from this on an annual basis every single year. This year, the FTA and HUD also, through our Community Development Block Grant, went back and expanded their packages. So not only in terms of how much they provided to cities, but also in what we could apportion to those grants. So this has saved us in the general fund from not having to come out of pocket for costs that we would otherwise utilize in those cases. Helping us navigate all of this is Baker Donaldson. I believe you passed that contract at the last council meeting, and so they are a legal firm that will help us navigate all of this, and there is much to navigate. I appreciate that. So they will look to not only the CARES Act, but also relief on all fronts. I also want to mention here our national and our state lobbyists that work for us. They advocate for us in trying to obtain more relief and widen those the definitions that we look to and what we can accumulate in a reimbursement measure. So coming down the home stretch here. So revenues will be down. Sales and use taxes, lodging taxes, and gas taxes will be around $15 million from what we have budgeted. With savings from the departments, the grants, and increases in some revenues, we will actually be able to meet those expectations and do not have to dip into reserves. I can't tell you how big this is, because this will set the stage for the following year. Us not having to go back into our reserves will set the stage, and we will be able to look at what we have for next year, and if we have to, we will go into that, our budgets. So last slide, I want to look at, so revenues, I want to go back through that listing that we talked about earlier for our budget. The revenues, we have already looked at the picture of our largest revenues. We will be down, even from 19, we will be down in some cases. This will be a very lean year. So our projections, so I'm going to kind of refer you back just a little bit. That unemployment number of 7.5, and I mentioned that most economists think it will be well into next year before we are able to recover from that number. That really underpins a lot of where we think our economy will flow over the next year. So all of the projections in revenue and things like that that we are looking at, albeit they're different, and we will look at them from a different perspective, both historically and in the future, that is what we are looking to. We will have a slow recovery over the next 6 to 8 months coming out of this. So that's where the projections will go. Operating expenditures and expenses, we are in the process of talking to departments this week and next week. They know upfront what we are facing, and we are looking closely at their budgets. Debt, refunding is in the package. So as a financial advisor once told me, when the economy is really, really bad, that means that that's the time for us to borrow or refund. It's just like refinancing your mortgage. We can go back into the markets and we can refinance our debt and relook at things, and so that we can save money going out. We won't change those debt streams, but we can save money as we go into the future. And we are looking very closely at that along with our partners. Outside agencies, we have already asked them up front to cut by 5%. They got a letter in the mail along with their appropriations packages. And so everyone will be asked to contribute, and we are talking to them as well as the departments. Capital projects, they will be considered in light of everything else. We've already looked at delays on those, but we will be looking closely at those streams as well. And then fund balance, which ties into all of this, and liquidity. So we are resilient, and we will come through this. I want to thank you for your time. I hope that if you will take away anything from the following, while complicated, the city's budget is just a plan. It takes time to process, but I've said it before, the city is resilient, and I am hopeful. We will do this together, masked and 6 feet apart. Thank you. Do y'all have any questions?
Thank you. I can imagine we have a number. Council members, feel free. I want to say to you as well, Ms. Smith, this is not our first presentation of where we were. We want to thank you I want to speak on behalf of the council and just say you've been wonderful since you've joined our team here at the city. As we have a lot to consider going into October, this is a very in-depth presentation for the community. So I just want to say thank you before we get started. Councilwoman Robinson, then Councilwoman Akridge.
Let me echo, first of all, what Mr. Keith has said. You really have come to the city for such a time as this. We are grateful to have you. You have the right skills and background, and thank you for a great presentation. So just to clarify, the cuts that have been made in the departments amounted to, in round dollars?
You know, right now, they are probably somewhere close between 12 and 15 million.
That's
That
incredible.
number will shrink as we move closer to year end. But that is tremendous. It is a tremendous help.
So while we are grateful for your efforts, we're equally grateful to the department heads who have made a tremendous effort. It was an emergency effort, and they did it. So now the question is, I know that there were a lot of things that were delayed, put on the back burner. Looking at 2021, those cuts are going to have to stay in place until we have a clear picture of. So we're going to be a little bit behind on hiring, on fleet, on repairs, on lots of things. Is that right?
So as we are constructing the budget right now, we definitely, even in our talks to the departments as we go through that, we talk to them. I usually try to look to the departments to lead. How are you going to provide services and look at these cuts? And so I kind of leave that up to them, and they have led through that. So it may look a little different in the next year, but yes, we will be looking to them to help us in the next year.
And that's kind of where I was going with it. At what point are we impacting service to the community? So as we make those cuts, it sounds like you are already looking ahead and looking at service impact.
That
The
will look
department heads
different
are.
for every single department, and I cannot answer to specifics on service cuts and everything.
But-
I mean, there is the obvious, you know, that as we make cuts and as that lags into, once you get in there, there are things that are not going to happen.
And that's something that the department heads are going to, I know that they're looking at that very seriously. And then we have been getting numerous phone calls and emails about the Tier 1, Tier 2 retirement, a certain amount of pressure there. That is a decision that will be made next year. We don't have to make it this year. It seems that the implication seems to be that it has to be made now. But it will be made next year, and it will be made after we, again, have a clearer sight picture of where the budget for next year is going.
Absolutely. A lot of people have looked, both in past and leading up to this, in order to make that decision before they create their 2021 budgets. But given the impact of COVID, there is actually quite a few, and I've talked to a number of finance directors around the state that are delaying that decision. And I think it's wise, because it needs to be considered in the construct of our revenue streams as a whole, both for this picture and for the future. We also need to look, that needs to be also looked at. We actually are in process of putting together a very, a nice presentation for the council, and we'll look to presenting that. But that needs to be considered in light of how we treat sick leave, what are our retiree benefits, on a grander scale with the city as a whole. So I think that that is a piece to a larger puzzle that the city council and administration needs to look at.
Thank you again for your exceptional work, you and your staff.
Yes, absolutely.
Councilwoman Akridge, then Councilman Kling.
Thank you. So when you said resilient, the word that pops, we all should have been standing up going, woohoo, when you said we're pretty much going into the next fiscal year on an even plane. That's exceptional. When we say resilient, I also think of the word sustainable, and that is really critical, because the word sustainable, we've had people here talking about climate change and about environmental impacts, but an economic sustainability is really important. And so I want to emphasize that as good news for our city and good planning. You mentioned something about mortgage relief, and can you are you anticipating that some people will not be paying their property taxes because of something coming up from?
So I only said that so a lot of banks and financial institutions, this is from the resident perspective, from our citizens' perspective, they were either able to delay payments during this time or tack those payments onto the end of their loan. Or make reductions in payments through their financial institutions if they could show that they were unemployed or on a Huntington. I do not know the actual definitions of who met that relief, but that came to us, and that was put in some of the stimulus packages back to banks and such.
So they usually
Early
might
on.
defer their interest or even some of their principal, but not the escrow for property taxes and insurance.
I hope not. I hope that the delay, again, looking to unemployment and things like that, how will that affect that revenue stream? And that's what
Okay.
I was looking at.
Okay. You mentioned that a lot of a city's budget is a lot closer to a personal budget than anything else. So, and, permits have gone up because people are fixing up their houses, which is fantastic because it helps us not have to spread out and get new things, but keep what we have. That's part of sustainability. Have you been in touch with the two primary, Mr. Davis and Mr. Hamilton, about some investments that can definitely help us save money in the long run, specifically our street lights? They did an LED street light review. It does take a little bit of money up front, a little. However, it's a 65% more efficient, and typically the rolling over of the savings saves money. Have you heard, are they talking to you about that?
So, no, we're not talking specifically about those types of plans and right now. Now, I have been in talks in the past with those. We are looking at, and I know that they are looking at their project plans overall. I know those talks will come.
Sure.
They just aren't scheduled yet.
Okay.
I say they're not scheduled. They're actually scheduled. They're just not. They're
We
a little further along in the
Consider
process.
those part of the capital plan.
So that would be looked at in isolation, just like, it's kind of like I think about the picture of all of those different buckets and all of those different revenue streams we're looking at. That is a project that need to be looked at in the greater construct of what can we afford to do for our capital projects. That may prove out in the end to be something positive that we do in the coming year, but that may need to be weighed against some other project that has importance in our
Okay.
community.
Just as a keep in mind, please, that it is a savings.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd appreciate if you would be looking into that with the other administration. I've told some people employees who are interested in us making a decision about the retirement plan that I would think November is when we could. Is that a reasonable expectation to have a briefing from administration? Could that be? And that might be a question not only for you, but also with the mayor.
That's a question for a number of people, but I will make sure that we will look to that and make sure that gets on the calendar.
I'd like for that to be a goal, if we could.
Okay.
Thank you. And lastly, we've talked a couple times, Ms. Smith, about having some more transparency for our budgets. And you've been kind enough to give me a better list, for example, for the police department, because people have asked about it. And I've explained to them that the police department budget represents 30% of our overall budget because they have about 30% of the employees. What are your plans for making the budget in general more consumer friendly for our citizens?
So there's actually a lot already planned in place. Some of that takes a lot of time to stand up and put in play. For the immediate future, part of this budget that we will work on is acquiring all of those different features and then putting them in the construct of a narrative. So the budget package that you will receive later on before it's adopted by the council, before it goes to council, working in conjunction with the mayor, we will put together a budget package for you. That will have a lot of details and hopefully a lot of narrative to surround that. So just like the interplay of the funds that I showed you, there's lots of interplay in our budgets. And we hope to be able to put a narrative around that. That will be for publication to our public.
Once this council does approve the budget with some modicum of some negotiations, can it be produced online?
Absolutely.
Okay, that'd be great, because we have a very rudimentary one right now. Okay, I thank you very much, and terrific work.
Councilman Green?
Overall, I think you had a very good presentation, and it was very well organized, and, I think you did a real good job. I want to go back to what you had said about the internet sales tax. And I would think there would be some relationship that, because of sales tax here in town physically dropping, that there would be a greater increase in, sales tax that would be coming from Amazon, eBay, et cetera, coming back. But at this point, you're not really seeing anything like that?
Oh, no, the sellers, so the state, the simplified seller's use tax, and that is actually given to the state for online sales for those businesses that qualify. It's a calculation that comes back to us by population. So it does not equate 1-to-1 for the 4.5% that we receive out of the 9% that's assessed to citizens here in town. It's not a 1-to-1. However, we have seen dramatic increases in that is coming from that calculation out of the state back into the city.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Councilman Colvin?
Thank you, Mr. President. So I had several questions for you, but some of my colleagues brought up a couple of points that I want to speak to just very briefly. And it's obvious that you have put a lot of time and effort into this presentation, and we certainly appreciate you and your staff for that. I want to talk about the Tier 1, Tier 2. I've requested a meeting with both you and Mayor Battle and Councilor Riley for further discussion. With respect to my colleagues, I want to move forward with this on this side of the fiscal year. And my reason for that is because my research shows that the sooner we do this, we, the city, can save more money. I understand that looking at the raw cost right now, it could be somewhere in the neighborhood of $526,000 to get the Tier 2 employees up to the same benefit package as Tier 1. And let me just digress for a minute. That law is almost unconscionable. And let me share with you why. You take an employee who works 25 years under Tier 1, someone Tier 1 hired in prior to 2013, Tier 1. They retire in 25 years. The multiplier is 2.0125 times the number of years that they put in. And in this example, that would be 2.1025 times 25 years, which gives them a little over 50% pension after 25 years. Taking that same example with the Tier 2 employee, the multiplier is 1.675, which that employee, after 25 years, would get paid 33% of their top 3 of the last 10 years. So it just seems so unfair. I don't know what our state legislature was thinking at that time, but that is tantamount to unconscionable. and we say we love our employees, we say we love the police department, namely police and fire, although everybody benefits. But these employees, when they retire, and I've retired twice, that pension is all that you have until you get Social Security age. And in my case, it may take another 10, 12 years, but y'all missed that. But this is something that if we do it sooner rather than later, because those Tier 2 employees are going to start paying a higher percentage. They're going to start paying about 7% for non-fire employees, and the fire employees will pay about 8.5%. So current employees under Tier 1 are paying 6%. So they're going to pay more just to get the same benefits that Tier 1 employees get. But the sooner we do this, it saves the city money and the state, because they'll start contributing this year at those percentages rather than if we wait until November and pass it for the next fiscal year, because you can't do it mid-year, then we would have lost 24, however many employees under Tier 2 that would not have had an opportunity to contribute. And keep in mind that there will be some Tier 2 employees who were hired in 2013 who, once they reach 10 years, could retire if they meet the age requirement. So we really don't have a lot of time to really pontificate about this thing. We've got to be, as my president says, intentional about moving forward with it. So just wanted to put that out there, food for thought.
Okay.
And Mr. President, I'm assuming at some
Absolutely.
future time that we can have a presentation
I completely agree.
with
I would love one as soon as
our
possible.
finance director and maybe someone with the retirement system of Alabama as well.
I completely agree.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Of course, they saved the headache for last, and I'm going to move fast. You know, I dive into stuff and love it. Is the 11.5% a state mandate of our saved revenue?
That is a local, set locally,
So would that, if that percentage was to change, would that be ordinance based?
yes.
So when Moody goes and looks at our liquidation versus our debt ratio, that 890 million, can we parcel that out, or do they consider that as 890 million?
So going to the rating agencies is, I keep comparing it back to your own personal things. It's kind of like going to the bank, and that bank has a loan committee.
Right.
And they are going to decide whether or not you are good for whatever loan construct you are given, 30 years, 15 years, whatever you come under. And the same effect on the rating agencies look at us. So while that is $890 million, that comes from various revenue sources. And when we go to the rating agencies, we will present that this debt is paid out of sewer fund. This debt is paid out of those dedicated ad valorem taxes. And these are the different revenue streams that we look to. And they consider that as a whole.
And the reason I say that for everybody at home, as they make that comparison, they also assess the value of the city, correct? And inherently, our revenue streams, and it's very important to state that some of our revenue streams are tied to some of these, such as our lodging tax, which would be high consideration as those are down, one that we just recently passed. In that same vein, there are big items that have been discussed that inherently, though we've said we can make that decision going into 90 and 2014 capital plan, it would be hard because we put all of the upfront money, and one of those would be City Hall, to have done all the work in consideration of where the location would be, all the upfront conversations that have been had. Do you foresee that some of the capital, when I say priority, do you foresee that some of those capital borrows as we go back to the market are inherently, it's not only that we have to do it at that time, but because the timeline that we structured it ties us to that timeline?
That's a tough question because so much of that is predicated on what our revenue streams are at the time, whether or not how our spending folds, and whether or not we actually utilize debt for that. Perhaps we replace one project with another and decide that we're going to actually cash fund some portion of that. We may not borrow as much. We may, instead of going out for 20 years, go out for 30 years. There is so many different questions that surrounding that. What underpins all of that, and I think your question, is that as we move through the capital projects funds and the budget of the city as a whole, in looking at those, we will be looking at those individual projects and see how far along are they. What is the cost to the city? And there is a cost for delaying this project. So that will definitely be part of the conversation as we move through looking at the various projects that we have on the table.
And one of the reasons I say that too, and it'll get to my last point, and I want to make sure that I'm stating this right. To my knowledge, the 2017 and 2018 tax reform that happened federally did not allow muni bonds to be refinanced anymore.
So they are allowed still, but we have to wait until a 10-year call date.
Gotcha.
So they cannot be advanced refunded.
Refinance bonds, gotcha.
That is the limitation, and basically I compare it to taking a tool, a very good tool out of your toolbox. That is what the federal government did to us.
So if that, and they definitely did it, if that's the case, if we are to, and I agree, try and find a way to have that liquidity on cash on hand, 2014 capital plan is the one that has the most and has performed well. In our projections last year, did we not account for percentage increases of maybe 3%? Did you, I cannot remember, did you not forecast that we would be above revenue?
Approximately 3% for sales and use taxes across the board. I mean, that varied a little bit fund to fund because of the way it's sliced out, but approximately 3% above 2019 revenue was the projection.
And the reason I asked that because at one point we had the 1990 capital plan that subsidized the general fund, and we just recently got away from that in the past 2 years, right?
We really can't
Before her
speak to
time.
that.
Before our time, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So if we were able to unencumber specific funds, would 2014 not be the location to do so?
Well, it could come again. Looking at those buckets, we have a number of places that funding could come from, whether that's the 1990, 2014, if it's the council's will. Yes, there's a number of places that funding could come from. But we've also got to look at what is that already underpinning. I mean, within the for instance, within the 2014 capital fund, we have some commitments on roads and bridges to ALDOT and others that we have already, basically contracted with or have agreements in place with. So we'll have to look at that and be sure that that plays out properly.
I would like to stick to that specifically because, one, I believe economic development has a true value to the city. I don't think they might complain and we get in trouble for it, and Bill Kling's going to get mad when I say this. People wouldn't mind driving on bad roads as long as they have good buildings and good jobs to go to. And I know we have earmarked perspective on the 2014 capital plan for certain road projects as well as certain road commitments. I think going into this next year, I really don't want to see a dip in certain appropriations because of the value of it. Inherently, there's probably unencumbered numbers that we can look at. I'm thinking of Downtown Redevelopment Authority that's at $2.5 million, where we don't know about what projects are to come, but we keep that amount of money there for the redevelopment or the abatement of certain values. And I say that to say, which is my last point, it was briefly mentioned by you, the CDBG funding, which has probably been the most consistent track for a very specific spending on appropriations and community-based appropriations. I don't imagine that it will go down. It's always been zeroed out by the president, but supported by Congress. With that C&I grant that we got, that was $1.2 million, it will be done probably in spring of 2021. With CDBG funding, are you aware of the flexibility that is allowed in that, or do you believe that the projected commitments that we have that's tied to it is stagnant in community development? So if we were looking for a flexible point to subsidize in certain ways, the CDBG funding, to your knowledge, allow us some flexibility to pull more money out to help the appropriations in the ones that we talked about?
That is going to be very tricky. So in any grant, whether it's CARES Act, CDBG, FTA, the grant has very narrow focus, and they know what they want that to be kind of spent on. And so we set budgets. CDBG actually starts their budget year in May of each year
Right.
and rolls. And so prior to that, we have to submit a budget to the agencies in order to be approved for that budget for the next fiscal year. Now, Scott Irwin can speak a whole lot better to
No, I
this than I
understand.
can. But yes, should we have specific things that is allowable within that grant and could be budgeted ahead of time, the possibilities are there.
Because I believe we're going to win that implementation grant. And with that comes large city commitments. And it is a horrible time to have those large city commitments for that grant, but we won't get that opportunity in the generation, and nobody in this room will be alive for the next opportunity that this implementation grant could have on the downtown area, on the redevelopment area of the Butler Terrace area. And that commitment, again, if you could, and we'll have this conversation getting up to the budget, I would like to look at what stipulations were put on that 1 cent sales tax and how far out our commitments and road projects go. I want to unencumber some of that money if possible, because I believe, again, in 2008, and maybe you can reference this in another location that you were in the 2008 lapse happened. How long did that last, did you see, in most muni financing?
It took anywhere from 5 to 7 years for us to recover just back to the levels that we were prior to that, much less making gains over that.
So if I was to just make a safe assumption and say that, Lord willing, is not, this is a bad one. Let's say that we're in the 3 to 5 year range of trying to recover to the expected forecast point that we have in revenues. There are going to be some time frames that we cannot make or miss. I mean, if we can't miss, we have to make. I'm using that C&I grant as an example. Once you apply for it, the implementation is correlated right after that. You're saying that as a city, we're committing to do these things. That's why the federal government's going to give us $30 million to do them. So he wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting. But I want to let everybody know that there are some things that the city have a window on that are highly important and impactful that we have to be very aware of as we balance. And it's not actually baked into, that's the issue. It's not baked into the 90 capital plan. It's not baked into the 2014 capital plan. But there is a true expectancy, I imagine, that we will have actual structural commitments if that is approved. So my only request of this is if you could come back when you get a chance and we could sit down, I'll sit down with Shane on how we unencumber that 2014 so that if flexibility is needed, it is there.
Mr. President,
Yes, sir.
I would probably suggest that we take the 2014 and do as we've always done. Let's kind of chart a path out where we're going to go with it, but unencumbering it. 2 years ago, we didn't know we had Toyota Mazda coming up, and we reworked the entire 2014 and 2009 plan so that we could make sure that we had the infrastructure, we could meet the requirements that we had to provide the 6,000 jobs. We're in the same situation with this one. When we get down to the point where we actually have this grant, we have reworked plans year after year after year so that we can put the emphasis where we think as a council and as an administration that it needs to be. And I think we have a full commitment to that at that time. But I wouldn't try to free up at this point that money until we get to that point. And Mr. Davis may have a little bit more on that.
And I just want to say before Mr. Davis, again, I'm asking for information. I'm not asking that I have no plan to do anything at this point. My question is, what are the things we're committed to? And if those things have been listed by priority, which inherently is tough to do when you're projecting the importance of one street versus another street, the list goes on. I have no problem. I would love to give you more money if I had it in my pocket. But we do need to understand that priority is a subjective statement. Priority inherently is the usage or the view of the majority of this council and the things that are to come, which again, I believe we need a new city hall like yesterday. Those things might be important to the makeup and work of the city, but in the 2014 capital plan, there's a lot of support that you have to give to the economic development of this city, and that's very hard to forecast.
Sure. Shane Davis, Director at Urban Economic Development. Let me kind of clarify the two capital plans we have. You have a 1990 capital plan that was established by council in 1990. Then you had a 2014 plan established by City Council in 2014. Those are drastically funded differently. So the 1990 plan is a percentage of the overall general fund revenues. Many years ago, as Council President alluded to, it supplemented the general fund. Well, the way that it did that is when it was originally set up in 1990, 23% of that general fund revenue went to fund the 1990 capital plan. We were constantly having to supplement the general fund to balance the budget. Council took action several years ago to reduce that percentage from 23% to 18%. So we made a permanent shift back into just the operating fund of the city. So it's a part of the general fund as a percentage of revenue. The 2014 is drastically different in that you passed an ordinance for a 1 cent sales tax that 1 cent directly irrelevant to the general fund goes to the 2014 plan. Now, to Councilman Keith's point on adopting or changing or modifying these capital plans, although Colonel Hamilton manages the 1990 plan, I manage the 2014 plan under Mayor Battle's direction and finance, it's a 10-year plan. But when we bring that plan to you, you're only approving that current budget year. That current very column to the very left, the other 9 years are anticipation or projections. And in the case I want to make that is in the case of the Choice Neighborhood project. You know, as we get those or as we get a grant or we're able to hit the mark on a projection, we will adjust those, as Mayor Battle mentioned, on the year that we need to do that in those outer years. So there's a lot of flexibility in the cap plan. There's vision. There's a lot of planning going in place of things we want to accomplish for our community and our citizens, but those are flexing. I think where, you know, John and I have started looking at both capital plans, and I think Ms. Penny's presentation tonight, it was a 10,000-foot view. She went through it very quickly. I urge council to go back through it and take your time and see where our city's at. Prior to COVID, we were hitting record numbers, and that's because of being very progressive, very aggressive in economic development. The portion we spend to grow the city and recruit jobs is less than 1% of the overall budget. So we're not spending a lot doing there, and we've had tremendous success with what investments we have made. We have 26,000 jobs to fill in the next 36 months.
Right.
So I'm not saying that to defend the plan. I'm just saying the choices you made in entering different development agreements is why we've got through COVID without making a lot of tough decisions. Department heads have done a fabulous job of kind of slowing down things we would want to do, and Ms. Smith showed that. And the same has happened in the capital plans. You know, COVID has slowed down some construction, some acquisition. So our ability to bring you those capital plans, some of it's just going to balance out due to COVID impacts on those projects. We've got some projects that we would have funded in 21 that's probably going to slip to the right just due to they're not as advanced as they would have been coming in the budget. And we're looking at all those things, but I just wanted to explain the difference in the 90 plan and the 14 plan, how they're funded.
Right, and I do want to say to the mayor and to Shane, this happens a lot. I'm actually, we're saying the same thing.
Yes.
I support the 2014 so much that I want it to be successful and flexible. And the 90 capital plan has the issue that it has to manage a lot of governmental buildings,
Correct.
governmental structures, John Hunt Park, all the above. And I think Jason is, I just said Jason. I'm sorry. PMF, Josh is here from, I'm thinking of PM. Anyway, I would love to find out, and I don't know, can you borrow against the 2014 plan? Because in CDBG, you can borrow up to three times the amount. Can you borrow against 2014 projected revenue?
Technically, you could pull out a revenue tax, but you wouldn't want to do that because general obligation debt is so much cheaper. That looks at the revenue streams as a whole, and that is what our rating is based on. Is that, you know, that it looks across the city as a whole, and if you issue general obligation debt, you're going to have better interest rates than you would a singular tax stream revenue bond if you issue that. So it would be hard. I could not see them could not see a rating agency giving us very good ratings
That's what I was
on
wondering.
something that was predicated on a 1% sales tax.
And Josh, in that way, and maybe we could talk at another time, and I'm almost done, I promise you. If we do have a project that we assume we can borrow for, is there when you go to market and explain, is that project have to be, when you're borrowing, like the amphitheater, if we're borrowing for the amphitheater, is the explanation when going to the market that this project is absolutely happening, or can we borrow with the projection that the project is happening in phases, X, Y, and Z? Does it have to be singularly accepted by the council? This is what the council passed, this is what we're borrowing for? Or can we project that we'll need it because we assume this is something we'll be supporting?
So there's really two questions in that. In the way that we set up our borrowings and the way that our transcript's written and the debt structure is written, it is based on we are borrowing for capital projects. This gets into kind of a merit of how tax exempt debt works, or even how taxable debt works. But in general, you don't want to borrow for something that you haven't already kind of had in place and had plans. We can do that. We can say we're going to borrow for something that we're going to do in the future. If we decide not to do that, number one, the longer that we delay, we have money in our coffers that basically the federal government isn't going to put up with us not spending that down, because they give a tax break to the banks, to investors for investing. That's why it's called tax exempt debt. And that's why our interest rates are lower. I mean, I'm getting down into the weeds here.
Yes, ma'am.
But we want to be, in other words, that is not something that I would recommend. If we decide that we're going to go to the markets for the amphitheater, then we need to start working on the amphitheater. And I would say we need to borrow based on how much we need to finish out the amphitheater.
And I'm agreeing with you wholeheartedly. So again, thank you both. To my council, I just want to make sure, as we talk to the discussion of the future budget, my belief is that the one word that is getting missed is the idea of priority. We really need to have a true conversation on council of what we view the priorities of the city in these tough times are, because I think they're going to vary if we discuss them with ourselves and with the administration. I think we'll be surprised at what we consider priority and what others do. So, Dr. Robinson.
So given all the discussions that we've had here tonight, Ms. Smith, when will you be comfortable or feel like you have enough information to hold the first budget hearings? I know that's a hard question.
That is a hard question. So our plan right now, let me just tell you what's in play. So we are holding departmental meetings and meetings with outside agencies, some of our ones that we've met with a while back, for the next 2 weeks. Revenues are already started and in projection. They are in review within my department, and will go out to others. And so as we start standing out those different pieces that I talked about, the debt is already set. We already have our debt in play, so we know what those expenses are going to be. Shane and John are working on those capital plans as we speak and looking at those funds. So as we start standing this up, then we'll start seeing where are our holes that need to be filled. What are the buckets that we have that are full? What are empty? Where do we need to fill? And then what are the priorities around that? Obviously, that's going to be set by mayor, administration, and council. And we'll start looking at that in the mayor and as we go through this. My hope is that in the next few weeks, which will go into the month of August, that we'll be able to stand at that budget and be having really large level discussions about finalizing that budget toward the end of August. I hope to have those ready.
So we could technically push approval of the budget to September 30th. Right? I know you'd hate to do that.
Technically.
You'd hate, but just to give you as much breathing room as possible. But the last council meeting in September is the 24th.
Right.
Yeah, our traditional has been to, roll out the budget the first week in September, and get it to council for introduction, and say on September 10th, have a work session on it. 17th, and then passage on the 24th. That's traditionally been how we've worked it, and it's been a pretty good process as we wandered through it.
All right. Thank you. Coming? All right, council, we will take a 7-minute recess. We will return and have presentation by our police department. All right. I'd now like to call this work session back to order. Mayor has given introduction, but I would like to give our chief the floor to introduce his staff. Council, we will give questions at the end. And Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. President Keith and distinguished members of the City Council, thank you so much for this invitation. The HPD command staff and I are excited to make this presentation tonight. In fact, we've been working on it for several days in a row now, just tweaking it. This is a state of the Huntsville Police Department, where we're at now, and I want to explain a little bit about how we got there as we go through these presentations today. We're in challenging times now across the country, so this type of communication is very important to all of us. It's very important to the police department. I hope that when we leave tonight, we'll have a better understanding of what kind of department we really have here in Huntsville and how we got to this point. With the local and national focus on police reform, we hope that this presentation will answer your questions and provide what you needed, all the information to better understand that this is a progressive and responsive department, that we've made these changes on our own through the years, and we're still making changes now, and I'm going to point out some of those, and so are the command staff as we go through here. These are transformational changes, and they've been monumental, and they would not have been possible without the assistance of you, City Council members, and Mayor Battle. So thank you so much for your support. Tonight's presentation will be made by HPD command staff and the Director of Human Resources for the City of Huntsville. Each will provide you a quick summary of a related specific area of our department. You will hear the changes that have been made to modernize our department, as well as how we are evolving to meet the ever-changing task put before us. I'm proud of each one of these commanders, and I believe that this presentation will show you how and why they've earned the respect and the trust of the community they work so hard to serve. Due to the lack of the time tonight, not all of the captains will be presenting, but some of the subject matter experts who've been working so will be. You know, the foundation of any police department is our directives. Some people call them policies, some people call them standard operating procedures or SOPs, but this is the backbone which form the operational guidelines on how your rules and regulations are clearly spelled out. To give you a summary, I'm going to ask Lieutenant Michael Johnson. Originally, Deputy Chief Corey Harris was going to be our presenter, and he worked very hard right up until about 1 o'clock this afternoon. He had a family emergency and had to leave town. So Lieutenant Johnson is a 22-year veteran of Huntsville Police Department with not only a bachelor's degree, he has a master's degree and a JD degree from Birmingham School of Law. He currently works at the department's public information officer. In fact, if you see any public communication from HPD, formal or social from HPD, chances are it came out of his office, so you probably recognize him. He's well prepared to give a perspective on how HPD directives, policies, our procedures, how they compare to national guidelines. These policies are a roadmap to ensure keeping our standards above the national expectations, and he's even prepared tonight to give you some examples on how we're leading other departments by creating a culture of change. Lieutenant.
And to the staff, if you're going to keep your mask on, that is fine. Just make sure that you orient the microphone directly under your mouth for CC. Lieutenant, the floor is yours.
Good evening, Mayor Battle and members of the City Council. Like the Chief was saying, I am the PIO for the department and will be filling in for Deputy Chief Corey Harris with the information I'll be sharing here in just a minute. His command covers our Operations Bureau, which is our precincts, Special Operations Division, and Criminal Investigations. I'd like to first take the time to thank all of you for allowing the Chief and command staff to speak on the state of the Huntsville Police Department and our operations. The President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing was initiated by the Obama administration in 2015. These presidential guidelines from the task force work and the executive order on safe communities have been implemented in various forms within our agency over the years. Many of these guidelines we've adopted into our policies over the years and as recent as just the last few months. I'm going to skim over the highlights of those guidelines, otherwise known as the 6 pillars developed from that task force to promote effective crime reduction while building public trust. Chief McMurray, at the end, will go over these in much more detail at the end of the presentation. Those 6 pillars are building trust and legitimacy between law enforcement, HPD, and the public, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, and also training and education and officer wellness and safety. This slide reveals our affiliations and partnerships with 11 organizations that help structure our police standards along with the city's policies and procedures and what we call APOST required training. APOST stands for the Alabama Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, from which minimum standards for all Alabama peace officers are measured. These organizations for which we remain affiliated with help guide our goals and objectives with continuing training and policy implementation. We currently insert these standards and policies from CALEA into our everyday operations, which we have been a part of for over 25 years. Starting in 1996, HPD has successfully completed 8 full accreditation cycles in the past 25 years. CALEA has 459 law enforcement standards. The standards provide requirements and suggestions for the information that should be included in our written directives. HPD currently has just over 200 written directives that our officers are held accountable for. Certification from CALEA includes 1,000 surveys on police performance within our city. This was completed just last year in 2019 and will occur again in 2021. Certification also includes on-site inspections of equipment and facilities throughout the department, which takes a couple of weeks. There are over 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, with only 707 of them being accredited. HPD is in the top tier of law enforcement agencies in the country, in that less than 5% of the agencies are CALEA accredited and have consistently for 25 years been re-accredited. Our last 2 re-accreditation cycles had 0 deficiencies from CALEA. We're currently opening our policies and procedures for public view, but we are still in the building process of this website portal. However, it should be available in just the next few months. Calls for service. This is kind of the backbone from our patrol. It's also what we wanted to provide you. It's the amount of calls for service answered by our officers and investigators. Over the years, HPD officers handled an average around 200,000 calls for service a year, between 190,000 to 200,000. As you can see, in 2019, we answered just over 195,000 calls for service. The average calls for service for each precinct last year was approximately 65,000. It's also broken down into shifts, and as you can see, each respective shift nearly averaged the same number of calls for service as the respective shifts. In a 6-year period, we have answered just over 1 million calls for service. Our organizational chart. Here's the Huntsville Police Department organizational chart. The command staff is comprised of 2 bureaus answering directly to the Chief of Police. Each bureau contains the necessary personnel and resources needed to support the demands of the police department and the community. As you can see, the Office of Internal Affairs and the PIO office answers directly to the Chief of Police. The Office of the Operations Bureau manages the most visible part of the department and is composed of most of our sworn personnel. Sworn means the badge and gun employees, such as rank and file officers and supervisors and investigators, which consist of the 3 precincts, special operations, and criminal investigations. The Services Bureau manages, let me go back one. The Services Bureau manages the behind-the-scenes area of the department, and it's composed of sworn and non-sworn personnel, which consist of the Police Academy, dispatch, records, evidence, identification, fleet, alarms, accreditation, public safety chaplains, and public safety IT divisions. Talk about Valor training for just a minute. violence against law enforcement, and ensuring officer resilience and survivability. This training and technical assistance program delivers current, dynamic, classroom, and web-based training that focuses on recognizing indicators of dangerous situations, applying diffusing techniques, implementing casualty care and rescue tactics, emphasizing professional policing standards, and improving wellness and resilience. Valor Standards provides our officers the safety guidelines and tools to assist our citizens in our community in need of mental health treatment. These 3 points guide those standards: knowledge, compassion, and de-escalation. With knowledge, learning from mental health professionals, problem-solving techniques, and supporting our mental health community when challenging situations occur. Compassion, personal interaction with people who have experienced and recovered from a mental health crisis, and family members who have cared for loved ones with mental illness. And de-escalation, CIT Crisis Intervention Team, teaches a new set of skills for ensuring officer safety with words, approach, and body language that convinces a person to get help or defuse a potentially violent encounter. That is proven through our yearly approximately 1,000 calls of suicide-related calls that we do answer. That's an average of 3 suicide-related calls a day. What is the FBI National Academy? It's a 10-week course in Quantico, Virginia at the FBI Academy for Law Enforcement's upper management. It serves to improve the administration of justice in police departments and agencies at home and abroad, and to raise law enforcement standards, knowledge, and cooperation worldwide. Historically, we have sent many HPD command staff members. Our most recent graduate is Captain McCarver, who was Director of Training and now over criminal investigations. Some of the basic concepts taught at that academy is intelligence theory, terrorism and terrorist mindsets, management science, law, behavioral science, law enforcement communication, and forensic science. What are the benefits of HPD participation in the FBI National Academy? Increased knowledge and information sharing on current topics, better understanding and knowledge of crisis negotiations for critical incidents, personnel and employee wellness, networking within law enforcement nationally. Many HPD sworn personnel have attended this academy for the last 30 years of the Huntsville Police. Our Police Academy, speaking on our training requirements as compared to Alabama State minimum standards. Alabama Peace Officer Standards and Training Commission, APOST as we call it, basic academies are just 13 weeks and 520 hours of training. The Huntsville Police Academy requires 18 weeks with 780 hours and also includes cultural diversity training and CIT training, which is not required by APOST. APOST mandates only 12 hours of continuing education for sworn officers each year. However, HPD officers receive 40 hours or more every year. In addition, every supervisor receives an additional 16 hours of continuing education. VDI, or verbal defense and influence, has been implemented by organizations ranging from police forces, correction facilities, and private security to schools, corporations, and hospitals and government agencies. Organizations implementing VDI have reported a range of positive outcomes, including reduced incidents of conflict, reduced incidents of violence, improved customer satisfaction, lower rates of complaints, reduced litigation costs, and reduced incidents of workplace injury. Some of our most progressive and policing initiatives of recent include the chokehold used in defense tactics were eliminated from training in the Huntsville Police Department in 2014 due to implementation of a new style of defensive tactics called SSGT. As required by APOST, use of force policy was changed to add the taser, which was introduced in 2016. That now gives a better definition to what is objectively reasonable and the objective reasonably test, which follows the United States Supreme Court test for what is reasonable. In 2016, body-worn cameras were approved and purchased and are now recording on every encounter with a citizen or the public. Another milestone in innovative policing strategies include training in mental health to provide supplemental assistance with our mental health community. We collaborated with Madison County Probate Judge Barger and Wellstone Mental Health in MHO, also known as the Mental Health Officer, and CIT programs. HPD is one of only 4 agencies nationally selected by the U.S. Department of Justice to establish a CIT training model. This program created and developed our mental health officers and crisis intervention teams. We now have 131 officers and supervisors certified and working the streets of Huntsville on all 3 shifts. As you can see, with the support of the Mayor's Office and City Council and community, we have provided quality and advanced training well above the state's requirements. This is what sets us apart from other agencies throughout the state when it comes to policy.
Thank you, Lieutenant. Deputy Chief Kirk Giles has supervised service with Huntsville. He's currently the Services Bureau Commander, supervising over 250 personnel in all those duties that were mentioned in that org chart. He's a graduate of the FBI NA Academy, and he's best suited to update all of us on the improvements to the department facilities and infrastructure as we pave the path to becoming the largest city and the largest police department in Alabama in the next few years. Chief Giles.
Thank you, Chief. Good evening. I appreciate this opportunity for us to come and talk about our department. Currently, our department works out of several different facilities. In the top left corner is our main administrative facility that's located on Wheeler Avenue. We have been in this facility since 1999, and it contains the office of the Chief of Police, the 2 Deputy Chiefs, records, and evidence. Prior to the year 2000, our patrol function was located at the old airport along with our police academy. In 2000, we transitioned to our current model of community policing when the North Precinct, which is on the bottom left, the South Precinct on the bottom right, and the West Precinct in the upper right, they were all established at that time. Since that time, new facilities have been constructed for the North and the West Precinct, while the South Precinct remained in its original location. Under your leadership and with the Mayor's Office support, our city has experienced exponential growth. You have given us the opportunity to grow and modernize it as a department. What you're looking at now is a conceptual drawing of the public safety training facility. It's currently under construction at the south end of Triana Boulevard and at a 30% completion rate. This is a 37 plus acre site with an additional 18 acres of wooded area. This location will house both our police and fire training academy as well as our K-9 range. This is the first time in 50 plus years that we have had a dedicated training facility specifically for our departments. With this modern facility, our departments will be able to better train our personnel as well as provide training for departments across the state. The facility itself is approximately 35,000 square feet, and both agencies will also share a 150-seat auditorium. On the HPD side, there's 3 large classrooms, 4 offices, a VITRA 300 training room, which will be discussed in a few, a driving simulator room, and a conference room. Our K-9 area will have 3 acres fenced and lighted training area, squad room, 3 offices, and secure storage. The last facility I want to talk to you about is the HPD FBI firing range. This range is located at the far south end of Waltrina Highway near the Huntsville Utilities water treatment plant. This project has culminated into a partnership with the FBI, which provided an additional $7 million to the budget. It's scheduled to open late next month and will be the first time since the early 1980s that we've had a dedicated standalone HPD firearms facility. This is a 50-acre site that features 2 buildings with approximately 20,000 square feet.
Point of order, sir. If you have one more outburst, I will have you remove everybody that the floor is for either the dais tonight and or the individual who is speaking. If anybody else speaks out, we will have you immediately removed from the chambers. You may continue.
Thank you. The firing range will be the finest in the state, if not the southeastern United States. It gives us the opportunity to present more realistic and dynamic training as well as hosting outside agencies. The site contains a 50-yard handgun range with 40 lanes, a 600-yard rifle range, 2 classrooms.
Mr. Thief, ours Officer Thief in. Thank you, Mr. Jarvis. We're going to escort you out. Point of order, we're just going to wait until he's removed. Mr. G, thank you so much. Point in and thank you so much. Thank you. If anybody else has any outbursts, I want to let you know that you will be removed immediately. This is your only warning. If you could wait just one moment. Thank you, Officer Tippett. The floor is yours again, sir. I apologize.
Thank you, sir. As I was saying, the site contains a 50-yard handgun range with 40 lanes, a 600-yard rifle range, 2 classrooms, defensive tactics training area, weapons cleaning room, ammo storage, and office space for the HPD and FBI. This last slide I want to show you is our simunition building. And simunition is an abbreviation of simulated ammunition. If you look at the far left side of the slide in the background, you will see our original simunition building, which was actually moved to this site on Sparkman Drive. The 2-story building in the forefront is a very unique simunition building. This building has removable walls and doors and allows us to change the floor plan without having to go through a reconstruction. We can practice building clearing and room searching and then totally change the layout. This allows for more variation in scenarios and changes the dynamics of the training. Again, we thank you for the opportunity to share our department with you.
Thank you, Chief Giles. Captain Anthony Hudson has been working with the Administrative Support Services for the past 4 years to bring modern technology to the front line of police work. He has worked tirelessly to improve the department's record management system, which is under construction right now, and he manages the HPD fleet, the alarm, the evidence, the impound record services, and all of Records Division, 911, Communications Division, just to name a few. Facilitating these changes through technology is a big job, but that's what he's been in charge of. He does very well. These efforts provided improved service, accountability, and transparency to the officer's daily work with the community. Chief Captain Hudson, go ahead.
Good evening, Council. In September 2003, the Huntsville Police Department purchased in-car video cameras, automated vehicle locators, and laptop computers for all of our marked police vehicles. Over the last 17 years, this equipment has been upgraded on 4 different occasions to what it is now. The laptop computers we have today